motion that this House prefers a strong social media presence over a physical presence in protest culture. I invite Prime Minister to start the debate. Please put your cell phones on silent. Do not exit or enter the room during speeches. If you must leave, please do so in between speeches without disturbing the debate. Thank you very much. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
The power that a social justice group has is not determined by the number of individuals that appear at your protest. It is not determined by the number and the loudness of the voices that scream for justice in your protest. It is determined by how long that protest stays relevant, how long you can keep and continue portraying that protest and keep that protest relevant in the minds of as many individuals as possible. That is a world that government is happy to defend. What is the stance coming from the side of government? Number one, we believe that social justice groups should actively prioritize social media in order to portray their message. This is to say that we would deprioritize resources from having physical protests in order to compensate for larger protests and a larger presence on social media. Those protests we have physically will be smaller and there will be less people at them. Secondly, we believe that social justice groups have a harder battle to fight in terms of physical protests, and we think that the ability for you to espouse on social justice and in order to be relevant is easier when you use social media. There are two standards that will define this debate. Number one, in which world do we have more of an ability to tap into protest culture and keep our movements relevant? And secondly, in which world is the message and the quality of our protest better? So what am I going to tell you as Prime Minister? I will tell you why social media is an important battleground that we must conquer now. Secondly, I'll tell you why it's harder for individuals to ignore your protests in a world where you exclusively use social media. My Deputy Prime Minister will tell you why the mechanisms of social media allow for more individuals to access these messages and protest. My first argument. What is a physical protest? Why social media is an important battleground for us to conquer. So very quickly, let's start with some characterization. First, what is a physical protest and why is it hard for social justice groups to access it? Number one, we think it's pretty simple. When you appear at areas like Congress, you have your banners, you have your shouting, or you have stuff like the Women's March in certain areas in Washington, D.C. So why is it harder for social groups to access it? Threefold. Number one, there are multiple limitations placed on your social group in order to have that presence. Number one, a lot of these groups have a lack of money and the issues that they talk about are time sensitive. In order to erase and in order to have a protest, you must first spend weeks or months in advance galvanizing enough support and sponsors in order to have the protest to begin with. Secondly, in order to have that protest too, you also have to have more money and capacity to own that protest, to make it the best protest possible. The second reason as to why this is problematic is because oftentimes there are state limitations on your ability to protest. What does this mean? When you are at a protest, the riot police are waiting for you. They're just waiting for you to make a mistake so they can rush in and beat you with their batons. They're just waiting to intimidate individuals from not coming to your protest. We saw this happen in Hong Kong recently after the election. We think side opposition needs to uniquely defend to us why these limitations are justifiable and why these limitations are still accessible for social media groups. But the third level is on individuals. Attending a protest is great, but attending a protest is also terrifying for the most amount of people. For an individual that wants to support the LGBT community, that wants to espouse on his or her identity, they cannot risk being seen at a protest for circumstances that surround them. Their family, their employment, their ability to attend these places are oftentimes severely limited. The fifth, oftentimes when media groups cover your are better. No, thank you. I'll take you later. Secondly, it is easier for you to access the platform for your allies. What does this mean? In order to access a physical protest, you have to take time off your work. You have to get a babysitter to take care of your child. You have to spend money in order to get from point A to point B. When you have social media, the limitations and the limitations for you to attend or join a protest is removed. It is simple. Now all you have to do is share status. Subscribe to the thousands of accounts that we have available. What this means is that it's easier for you to express your support for social media groups. The second thing is that it is important to note that this is not the same world from 10 years ago. This is the 21st century, and it revolves on viral culture. Most individuals get their messages from these groups. Most individuals get their messages from social media. When you tap into this and you convince the most amount of people through it, you can get more people on your side. Before I move in, yes?
So presumably we all agree that protests aren't there just because they're protests, but have outcomes they want to achieve. Can you be very clear about the mechanism from which you will achieve that?
Oh yeah, sure, I'm doing it right now. So first of all, the second thing that we will tell you is that when you have limitations on money and time, you have to be strategic. You have to prioritize the best issue or the most relevant issue. What does this translate to? It's how the LGBT community made gay marriage the main centerfold issue compared to STDs. Not because that they were discriminatory, but because they could not prioritize it. In our world, the ability and the outcome to attain that fight, it may be longer, but we talk about more issues. We have more of a capacity to do it. We don't need money to do it because it's literally free. The second thing, why is it harder to ignore social groups in our world? In the world of government, opposition, they can go away from the protest. They can shut us down. But it's harder in our world. When thousands of accounts are tweeting tweets from your account, you appear on the trending list. You appear on the Twitter list. What this means is that it's harder for individuals that oppose you to ignore you. You can't turn off social media all the time, but you can definitely drive away from a protest. So what does this result in? In our world, our groups have more capacity to operate because they have more members and they have less limitations. It is true, we may not have a physical presence anymore, but the types of allies and individuals that we gain in our world know our message better and are exposed to the most diverse form of a message. By the way, it's 7:20, and let's just say it is easy for us to have a presence physically, and we should definitely prioritize the presence we have in the most attainable form of social media. Thank you.
Then the Prime Minister for that speech now begins on office debates and invite leader of opposition. Here. This is actually really quite weird because 6 years ago in the WSDC final, I was arguing that social media didn't matter, and I'm doing exactly the same thing today. So, what do we not believe? Is by itself no virtue. Having a million tweets is no virtue unless you are taken seriously. And that is what we're going to defend today. This is how you get concrete outcomes. This is how you raise awareness of issues. This is how you spur personal change. This is how you spur legislative change. 3 points are substantive. Firstly, why is it that we signal a higher level of commitment to a cause, and that's crucial in persuading people that you need to be listened to? Secondly, why is it that physical protests are better able to reach beyond those already sympathetic to a cause? And lastly, message control. Before that, some brief rebuttal. Firstly, the framing about how it's important that we keep the issue in the public's minds for the longest period of time. That is the exact opposite of what you need to do. Because keeping an issue constantly alive means that eventually it becomes normal. It fades into the ordinary background hum when every tweet you give is interspersed with another interesting Kardashian happening. That's when you lose the specific focus that you need to get these done. What else did I say? The main bulk of the analysis really was premised on the idea of inclusivity, that because the barriers to entry are low and you can be anonymous, it's very easy to participate in online discussions. That is the problem. Because everyone can do it. You do not know if the person who's tweeting has made a sacrifice. A person who has personally suffered violence at a health point can tweet the exact same tweet of a college sophomore who just thinks it's kind of a cool thing to be in and everyone else is voting Democrat, so this is how I virtue signal. How do I know who cares about this issue? How do I know who's willing to make a sacrifice? How do I know who's willing to risk police brutality to make their voices heard? We never know in your world. So I think most of the analysis there is actually helpful. More on this later. So, no, thank you. First point was substantive. Why is it that we think it's important that we signal a level of commitment? There are two ways in which we believe that physical protests increase the commitment and the signal of commitment to people outside of that group. Firstly, for people who are participating in the actual protest themselves. So let's say this college sophomore who doesn't care very much actually attends a protest. That's an incredibly valuable sphere of interaction with people whose lived experiences have borne out the suffering of the issue they are protesting about, not at this point in time. That allows you to have those discussions that convinces you of the importance of the issue and inspire you to take action elsewhere. So for people within that protest, it's hugely important to them. But what about trying to persuade political powers that be that you ought to be taken seriously? We believe that political protest is unbelievably valuable in a couple of ways. Number one, the fact they're willing to make physical protests, the fact they're willing to make personal sacrifices, no thank you, signals that you are not willing to have the government ignore this issue, and they will continue to be troublesome to the government as long as this issue remains unaddressed. This is important because it signals to political actors that it's a genuine well of resentment as opposed to virtue signaling individuals out there they can tap onto political causes. The very good example of this, I'll take you in a moment, is Bernie Sanders. It was after the Occupy Wall Street protest that Bernie Sanders recognized as an opportunity for him here to capitalize upon them and give them a voice which today is very influential in American politics. Yeah, go for it.
So when the portrayals of your groups are controlled by state actors and state media, how do you fight against that narrative?
Well, this is actually my third point, but let's be very clear. Let's do a comparative between the ease of controlling physical space and virtual space. Now, in some senses, it's a lot easier to control virtual space than physical space, because if the Chinese government realizes that something like Twitter being in the country is damaging, it just needs to not give them the right to have an IP address and to signal from them. Compare this to physical space. It's quite hard to get rid of space. No, thank you. Right? That is something which no government can do, no matter how oppressive they are. It's also, by the way, quite easy for you to pick the most extreme tweets, but I'll talk about that later. You're messing up my structure, so stuff. So level of commitment. So you signal that commitment and that sacrifice that's really valuable, that means people take it seriously, that means the cause gets a voice, gets impact. So that's the first point. Second point, how do we reach beyond those already sympathetic? We believe that when it comes to social media, no thank you, there's a really big problem of self-selection. Because it's true that Twitter displays what the trends are, but you don't want people to just know that there is this trend. You want them to understand what the causes of the trend are, what the issues are, so that they can begin the personal advocacy for it, or they can write to a senator, or they can change their own personal actions, right? No, thank you. So what's the problem then with social media? The problem is that when you need to persuade people who are in the middle ground or on the fence, social media is uniquely self-selecting for people who already agree with it. No, thank you, right? So if you have a Facebook group, people will get messages from your Facebook group if they like that Facebook group. If you have a Twitter feed, people who follow that Twitter feed are most likely to be engaged with your issue as well. Now, is this a perfect problem? No. Like obviously, there's lots of overlap between people who follow religiously and people who don't. The point is, the comparative is what's relevant here. Compared to a physical protest, which is often disruptive, which is often situated in areas where people around you are hostile. That means there's a level of engagement and visibility which does not exist. Also, on a more pragmatic level, look at things like pride parades, for instance, right? People who are not engaged, for instance, can participate in them. This also, by the way, rebuts some of the stuff about anonymity, right? You can actually be reasonably anonymous in a protest. In fact, the problems you talk about with violence often arise because people are quite uniquely anonymous in a protest environment to begin with. So we think that there's less self-selection in the physical world than there is in the real world, often because of the disruptive nature of the protest. Lastly, when it comes to message control. One of the problems with social media is that there's just so much of it. The media company or corporation, no thank you, always has a choice on A, what issue to cover, and B, within that issue you want to cover, which tweet does it want to cover? Given the millions of tweets which you are happy to have on your side, we can't possibly cover all of them. The media, therefore, becomes the one who selects what message becomes dominant and what people believe your movement is. On that point, no thank you. Why is this harmful? Because the media has an inbuilt profit incentive to select those tweets, the most unrepresentative and often the most extreme. So for instance, the media tends to highlight, for instance, women who say things like, actually, there's nothing wrong with man-hating. But when that goes on the front page of the Washington Post, that becomes the dominant narrative which people understand about what it means to be a feminist. That makes it very hard for the movement to sell its message. Now, can you do this in a protest? Yes, you can. You can choose who to interview, right? Or you can choose to focus on the violence. Here's the comparative. At least in a protest, you have more message control because you can tell people what to put on their placards, what to chant, and the media can't just ignore that outright because the fact of a protest itself is interesting, whereas having a tweet is not intrinsically interesting. What about violence then, in the worst case scenario? This is why violence is a virtue. Often, a violent protest allows for other moderate protests to look like a much better alternative. It shifts the definition of what the middle ground is. So Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam made Martin Luther King so much more persuasive, because people realized that if they wanted to listen to Martin Luther King and his peaceful protest, the alternative was the Nation of Islam and the dangers that represented to contemporary white society. So even in the cases of violence, we are happy to bite the bullet and say there are virtues there. I'm extremely proud today to oppose.
Thank you for the speech. Now, please give my government. I invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah, I got it.
If Martin Luther King had Twitter, maybe we would have gotten rid of the Jim Crow laws faster. Maybe we would have been able to reach more people and make sure that African Americans are as discriminated as they are today. One question of response I'll answer. Where is there more change? Before telling you why anonymity on social media is great for me. Where are there more change on 4 levels? Firstly, should social media protests be relevant? One, of course it should be. Because that means we can espouse on the different trends of social media and we can cater to very time-sensitive issues. That means it's more comprehensive in a world where we can capitalize on these trends. We think normalization is great. It's great if you live in a world where there's no taboo on talking about whether a gay person should have rights or having these kinds of discussions in your community. This means more conversations in our world and more capacity to moderate and talk to individuals about the different struggles. I think normalization is great if it means that social media protest and giving an African American rights is seen as a normal thing as opposed to your world where it's seen as something controversial and something that we need to talk about. Secondly, is commitment good? One, notice this contradiction in their case. They say you have some level of anonymity in your protest, then you can't have commitment as well. Because if it's true, you have anonymity, then all these things about one person putting in commitment, one person making that struggle is diminished in your world as well. Have you seen? So you can't have your cake and eat it too. Secondly, I don't understand what have you seen. I don't understand why a person that is racist to you will necessarily care about the amount of commitment that you put into the protest or the sacrifices and struggles that you have to go through. But notice that conceding to the premise that people view it as a large sacrifice also concedes to all the harms of the Prime Minister. That it's true that there are large barriers of entry to protest and it's much harder for you to access those protests in your world. So it's a concession to all the harms, that you have less critical mass in your world, less capacity to pressure governments to the point in which they feel as if your movement is small. More, have you seen, concession to the fact that state media can co-opt your messages and tell you that these things are horrible and call your movement antagonistic and fighting against the government. So the comparative in our world is simple. The comparative is in our world, we gain anonymity which allows us to act on different fronts, have a seat, and allows us to gain more critical mass and reduce the barriers of entry to your movement, right? But thirdly, what about message control? One, notice message control is horrible because again, this concedes to Prime Minister's argument that your physical protests are less comprehensive, that you can only cater to one message as opposed to a Twitter account where you can espouse on multiple faceted versions of that social movement, have a seat, and fight for different have a seat. And that means that message control is horrible in your world because you dictate the identity of social movements and in the process often don't cater to the minority in that social movement. So for instance, that side of the house will only cater and fight for gay marriage because it's the most relatable cause of the LGBT movement as opposed to transgenders fighting for bathroom bills because less people relate to that. Because in order for you to gain that change and to gain relevance, you are forced to look at the most thing that panders to the largest amount of individuals. Thirdly, where do we have more access? I think it's
weird response about space really didn't make sense, right? Because it ignores all the analysis coming from Prime Minister. That oftentimes states say that there are roadblocks, there's an event happening on this day, therefore you cannot have these protests, have AC. But like also the comparative is social media, like literally no limitation of space, right? So I don't get the comparative. Have a seat. Secondly, extremism is worse in your world when the media can manipulate the things that you say and make you seem antagonistic. Because the Prime Minister told you that they often have a vested incentive to make things as controversial as possible in order to gain the most amount of views and the most amount of rating. This means they have a vested incentive to paint the Black Lives Matter movement as antagonistic, as people that are trying to take away your rights, have a seat, or as people that have an incentive to be violent. The comparative in our world is engaging and getting information from the horse's mouth, where you can actively engage with someone on the ground and you can see for them for what they really are. Lastly, when we moderate people on the fence and bigots? One, I think bigots are more able to turn off the TV, but they cannot escape trends. They cannot escape culture that posts articles and constantly does these things. Secondly, self-selection is way worse in your world because it's harder to call out NBC with all the political capital that they have as opposed to one Twitter account that tells you you're wrong. I think it's easier to call these people out, but also if they concede to the premise of critical mass, we have more capacity and more people to call these individuals out and more impactful change. But like, where do we get more legislation and so on? So one, we get more critical mass, which means governments see it as more pressuring and more of an incentive to create legislation or to support individuals. Having seen. Secondly, being able to opt into your social movement is more than just getting legislation. And this is where I move into my argumentation. How does anonymity on social media become great for social movements? Before I go on, I'll show anyone here.
Okay, so it is true that you do get mass for some of these social movements. Do you think there are people who might like a Facebook page who will never show up to that event because they actually don't care that much?
Correct. That's why I think it's great, because there's a barrier of entry of people having to care so much in order to join your physical protest. If we can create the illusion of critical mass with using social media, I think that's great. Because notice the comparative is them not doing anything in the world of opposition. At the very least in our world, they do something. They add to the illusion of critical mass. They provide a support structure for gay people that can opt into a community that seems more supportive because there are more people that have their backs. In your world, they do absolutely nothing. They are more hostile to your community. What's the comparative, man? Firstly, how anonymity on social media is great for movements. The premise is twofold. One, on social media, you're able to be anonymous. Two, other than just legislations, movements aim to include everyone in their fights and provide support structures for victims of discrimination. What can we now do? People can hide under the veil of anonymity and still act in this situation. This means they are more incentivized to not necessarily join, but just engage, because they are not scared of the discrimination or not scared of the things that people say about them. Two, people can ask questions when there are taboos in public about talking about these social movements, about being in a very white-centric community that will discriminate you or say horrible things about you if you even question the Black Lives Matter movement. What are the outcomes of this? One, it means a gay child who is trying to construct his identity has more capacity to in a world where he has a larger support structure, with more support groups, with the illusion that there are more people that will be less hostile towards him. Secondly, bigots and people can ask questions that will be taboo in their community. So we have more capacity to relate. Even if they don't make a 360 change, they're likely to be less hostile in the world of government. They're likely to have slightly more understanding about the things that go on, and I think that's an exclusive benefit to the world of proposition.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for that speech, and now I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Panel, I'm really unsure what's the end of the movement we want to fight for in this debate. It sounds like because it's so hard for us to make any achievement, so we better try our luck and just do our work and see what we can get, in the end of the debate. Essentially, our side argues for you that social media presents is secondary, is complementary, but should not be essential because it really signals things with no clarity. and it makes us confused about the progress we have been made. What we argue for you is precisely, we want to know how many supporters we have, how many sponsors we have, how many politicians we have. Those are essential things for us to make constructive changes. What the government cycle told you in their speeches? Well, things. First thing we deal with this thing about people are going to appear to be more violent and radical in physical reasons. 2 layers of responses. First, if they do something against the law, for example, we ask them of the observers or pedestrians on the streets, we are happy that police don't arrest them because they're simply offending the law. But simply as well, but secondly, simply evaluating that action in aspects of what we can get for this movement. We do think, and we are happy to see they appear to be more radical, because that is to say, unless you deal with my issue, not just stop doing or stop walking on the streets to kind of bother their life. Like, for example, London bus drivers or metro drivers to go on strike periodically, right? Secondly, they want to talk about limitation removed. It's basically like a missionary world with internet and no body. So 2 things here. First, you got to understand both sides actually have limitations. So things the storytelling stuff of you have VPNs, you can circumvent certain regulations, it's not true. Why is that? Firstly, for example, in China, VPNs are expensive, they're super expensive. Secondly, actually government have a better ability to shut off the VPNs if they want to. That is to say, on both sides, you are relying on the tolerance of the government. You are relying on to what extent the government is allowing you to do those kind of things. We don't see a really difference between the side and the each side. Secondly, no, thank you. It sounds like in the world it did you that you know what you're going to if you are seeing as a value of the protest, we arrest it. It's extremely conservative, and the word that the government really determined to arrest you if they spot you there at the campus of the protest. So the second response is that if we do agree, the government is going to do something to you, we would rather that happen openly. Because very simply and obviously, if you have the government, for example, Chinese government try to IP address and the refugee secretly as once done by USSR, we think those are war scenarios where people would even be known it would even not be known to people for any other subsequent actions to save you. But third, about why we think the narrow down tactics initiating such physical presence is better than that. Recognize they have to concede to maintain the people's attention to your Facebook page. You have to shape your agenda according to what has been happening in the society. Right? We think that is bad, because that is always a sheet of focus that distracts people from what they truly should care about. On the other side, we argue we only want individual issues to be a priority of agenda. Recognize it's detrimental on their side, because when you do not have a physical presence, the people finally ask a question, why are we having this discussion here? You have nothing to tell them to. Just say, oh, it's just some people create this Facebook group for discussion, etc., etc. We think that's specifically bad. With those in mind, 2 substantive my speech. First, I'm going to chat to you a little bit about the relationship between social media and physical presence.
Yes, if you say people being hit is good because it shows that they are not going to go away, this concedes that you yourself want constant relevance, which is contradictory to your leader of.
No. We're not saying people being hated is good. We say that's so bad. But the thing is, firstly, any protest march, you cannot stop people from doing overreacting. For example, you cannot even stop network violence, stuff like Facebook, right? We still condemn those kind of stuff, but we do think being radical in your mind and restrict your behavior is a beneficial thing for our movement. Firstly, let's chat about the relation between social media and physical presence, right? We make it very clear to you. Social media wipe out physical presence, not only because of the substitutional effect, and we argue physical presence strengthen the social media presence, the cornerstone of that. Why is it so? Because we think social media has to be secondary, because it's always an option. We disillusionize you if you do think that is illusion. What we brought you is that if you have a protest march where 3,000 people signed up and finally ended up with only 39 people showing appearance, we think that's so bad and that's irreversible harm done to you. And on the other side, we say, you know what? I just joined this parade or this protest march, and I have a selfie and look at my Facebook picture. Under those cases, they are no longer distraction but diversification of these issues in every aspect of life. But under their world, they have no origin of the attention, and finally people will get lost in that. That's also why we understand social media as the horrible initiator, even though we agree it's a good follow-up and aggregator of the issues. Ashish told you, it's about level of commitment. But in addition to analyze with that, it's that because people are different, people are disparate, they are so hard to have group skill actions. Some people will say, I have a final due this afternoon, so I'm not going to, I have a final due tonight, I'm not going to join this protest. So other people say, even if I have a final due tonight, I want to go join this protest march. This is pretty important
On that point.
because protest march can only have an impact if it happens on a group scale. Reducing as individual action is not as useful as a kind of stuff. Secondly, we do agree that the personal self-association reason movement, the sympathetic and empathy from yourself to the concept of justice is particularly important. It's important because it's about who introduces you to this event, who leads you, who organizes and leads you to this event. We think that's particularly important because when you know these people via private conversations, when you buy zero reasons for supporting this movement, you are going to be one of them. That is particularly important part because it affects the quality of this presence as analyzed by Ashish as well. Therefore, the end of our work, we think when everyone sees the next Facebook event, Facebook will say, oh, it's just another Facebook group, it's a fake event. That is when they lose all the debate from us. So secondly, we're talking about which side provides you politic change and a comparative, right? We have to understand. In this debate, we agree. We have a conservative societies where we have a powerful majority, where we have political forces against us. We do believe that you cannot win against them because firstly, everyone has time and money and technology that simply outnumber you. And secondly, their focuses are simply more like lasting than you do. So that is to say, usually what we have is that in media, those kind of minority groups or like justice movement can never be advantage because the media is controlled by the other side. Therefore, so we think the only issue we're going to talk about in the matter is via interpersonal conversations. If things are bad, the government does shoot on people, and the newspaper controlled by the CCD said, no, we can do that. The only message we rely on is for people to tell you that verbally that, oh, you know what, they're already shooting on people. That is important because that's the only case you're going to that's the only case you're going to rely on your physical presence in the end of this debate. For all these reasons, very proud to your host.
I thank the leader of office for that speech. And now I'd like to invite the government witness.
$178 million tweets are sent daily. 178 million tweets that connect individuals that could never access your protest, and 178 million tweets that can place pressure on governments and structures of power in a way that you cannot shut down with a permit or with the threat of a police force. Two issues in my speech. Firstly, in which world are the image of movements more relevant and credible? And secondly, under which world will a better capacity to act in regards to allies and people within the movement? My first issue, in which world is the image better? Side opposition had three premises under this issue. Firstly, that the value of your movement is intrinsically better when it's always portrayed to be angry. Notice that the leader of opposition never actually explained any of this analysis, that he asserted that because it is angry, it is more relevant and more people will engage with it. But they never engaged with the comparative that my Prime Minister brought up to you. That in our world, we can still document anger, but instead our anger comes on Facebook Live messages that reach more people. In our world, we can have as many forums and threads that we need to discuss different versions of pain that different individuals feel. Particularly because we told you, because of the time and the monetary constraints on protest groups, they often have to prioritize to discuss the most relatable conduct. That is to say, all the issues regarding things like microaggressions will be left out in their work because you have to prioritize the worst instance. The comparative is in our work, we can have greater diversification of discussions because we are not limited by time or money. Have a seat. The second premise is really weird one on message control. It's horrible on social media. Look, message control happens on both worlds, but in opposition it's worse for two reasons. Firstly, in social media, there are already algorithms that exist that prevent you from seeing the same tweet all over again. That means it's very difficult for an individual to go on Twitter to get a message taken out of context. But secondly, within media, media organizations in the world of opposition are profit-oriented. So they are more likely to sensationalize the protest that you have as one that's important. Why is sensationalization bad? The nature of the movement is one that's easily painted as one that's antagonistic. That when people from a minority culture step up into the streets and call for arms against the government, it's easy for NDC to place them in an antagonistic light. The problem with that is, when you do that, you remove credibility from your movement on individuals who still try to formulate their opinion regarding your social issue. The less credibility in the world of opposition is one that you have less political traction. Have a seat. Thirdly, will people get lost in social media? I don't understand this argument. Do you need a map to navigate Twitter? It's very easy for you to go on social media and go on different pages or different tweet handles and see different diversification of opinions. Because the comparative is in our world, we can have multiple different tweet handles that discuss multiple different issues. One handle can discuss the effects of cultural appropriation on one community, the other handle can discuss the effects of minority oppression in the Western world. If we don't think a singular message is one that your protest groups have to defend, I think that's where it gets worse. But even then, I think this is a very odd argument, because this is an argument against any form of protesting, that if you were to protest for too many things, then you will drown out. I think your protests are still likely to fall under the same harms. Finally, the final premise is which side is pressure better? So we told you from outside the house, when largely unprotested, have a seat, is that social media is consistent in the pressure that you have. Because notice in the world of opposition, the pressure that you have is one that happens once every 6 months. It is one that is for 12 hours, for 6 hours at a time, you discuss the issue, and you have to coalesce the movement against another protest. But in our world, the pressure is constant when individuals who otherwise cannot access your protest can now go to social media to shame bigoted statements, to shame people, companies who appropriate culture for marketing purposes. I think it's far better, this pressure is far better because it's harder to ignore a consistent statement. My second issue, in which world do we have a better capacity to act? Before I move on, yes.
So you say you can show your intensity of preference on Facebook, on Twitter, by being angry. Anyone's read any doom threads, everyone's angry.
Yes, but the anger you want people to portray in your world is one that paints your minorities in antagonistic light, which makes it harder for people to sympathize with your movement when they see it taking your streets and trying to rob your government. So in which world do we have better capacity to react? The first premise that outside opposition tries to portray is that when you have a physical presence, it equates to better power. This largely dismisses the wealth of content that we told you in Prime Minister. Three reasons. Firstly, it's very difficult for a lot of people to take time out of their lives to actually go to a movement. Comparatively, it's easier for you to go to social media and to engage in and post or to engage in discussions there. Secondly, we think that your power of your protest is largely controlled by states. Protests need permits. Protests will have police presence nearby. All of this shapes a very antagonistic environment that the state can opt for you to have or not. If you do not get that permit and you still coalesce, it's an illegal movement, you give more sympathy to the state. Finally, protests are largely unsustainable, because notice that a lot of their efforts for protests are things that are short-term and in small bursts of cultural relevance. So I think because the movement takes a long time to coalesce its protests and organize, netizens
that bad, can you imagine how they would treat individuals who go out on the street and demand their government for some recourse? In a world where governments do this, you put more people in prison, you incentivize governments to crack down harsher on these protests, you force governments to enact laws to disband social movements from coalescing in the first place. We think in our world, if the problem is VPN, everyone who goes to China already goes to VPN. So I think it's pretty easy for people to coalesce online. The success of a minority group can never be included by excluding them from a 21st century viral culture that enacts activism.
I tend to jump with that speech, now let's invite the opposition period.
It may not be that you are always reminded as a non-member of the group about this particular issue of which is being protested, but it remains politically relevant. The reason it does is those people who are participating in the protest are much more likely to go out and vote on these single issues. They are much more likely to campaign for the political party or the politician who supports it. They are much more likely to donate for it. They don't need to be constantly reminded. All they need to do, all the politicians need to know, is that they exist, and they exist in number, and they care, that they are a critical mass, not just a mass, which is what you end up with on the side of the government. Let's talk about three things. One, credibility. Secondly, let's look at media portrayal and violence. And finally, let's talk about awareness. Just one thing which doesn't fit into that. The second speaker notes that these important individuals have social safety nets. We agree. You can have forums, you can have Facebook groups which are social safety nets without that have anything to do with protest culture. We'll leave that is out of the debate. If you believe it is in the debate, you think it is generally pretty good, you can talk to real people. You can talk to people who are authentic, which you know are real, but we don't think it's a major issue in the debate. Let's firstly talk about the notion of credibility. Why exactly do we want credibility? The point of protest, I think we all agree, isn't just because of protest per se, but as a long term we want legislative change, we want these issues largely to be addressed. Why exactly is that unlikely in their version of the world? The first thing we tell you is that it's very difficult to know what someone's likes means. I may well like a picture of Barack Obama kissing Michelle, and also like one where he's making comments about Black Lives Matter, but I don't have the same intensity of preference for those two things. It is very difficult for individuals and a politician to know how intense your preferences are because what you're doing on Facebook. That is secondly because lots of people simply like you say though. You like things because you want to say, I like these things, not because you actually like those things. If you just think about the friends we know, we can all tell that suddenly true in terms of the claims and causes they decide to post about. It isn't actually that they have any degree of real care about it. That site says, oh, but you can come across as angry on Facebook or on Twitter. Everyone can come across as angry on Facebook and Twitter. There really isn't a barrier of entry to this. And that's why we didn't respond to the first speaker from the government. It's that we concede most of what he's saying. Yes, it is difficult for people to come out and protest. Yes, there are going to be reasons why you can't. There are barriers to entry. It will be difficult for you because you might have a tight time of work. Some of those you can mitigate, like for instance, have protests on weekends. But irrespective of that, that is what shows your credibility. That is what shows that you actually care. They do note, interestingly, that look, in some cases you just can't protest because you might need permits on the part of the state. I would like to note that firstly, there is a small subset of cases. I think in most countries you are able to protest. There might be some limits on how easily you can protest. But even if that's not the case, we're okay with you having to stand up to the police. We are okay with you having to be brave. We're okay with individuals having to actually put themselves at physical risk. Why? Because that is the biggest commitment mechanism that you are brave and you are going to do something as a result of the cause. Even in dictatorial states, that is why this matters, because this isn't simply a group which will go away very easily, but one which will permanently be around. That is why it makes a difference, and that is why we think it actually matters in these cases. That's a reasonable trade-off for work debate, and that is why we think you have some political efficacy on our side, which you certainly do not have on their side, even if you have more people liking it. Secondly, let's talk about the way the media presents it. Now, the major point what that side wanted to make was an interesting one, which is, look, you only often push single issues. You only push, for instance, gay marriage and the gay rights movement. The first thing I want to note is I'm not necessarily sure that's bad. It might be preferable if all issues could have a lot of airtime and get everything changed. but I actually don't think that's a very realistic comparative. There's a couple reasons for it. If a movement isn't very focused, then you can't, for instance, specify exactly the arguments or get those arguments out to a large group of people. More importantly, you simply get more and more enemies if you have a very wide legislative agenda. So take, for instance, the example they decided to give. Look at the civil rights movement. You might get Southern Democrats on side that ended mass discrimination when it comes to Jim Crow. You often won't get them on side when it comes to things like the Voting Rights Act, at least initially. Bundling all those issues up at once creates more opposition, which means you don't get the kind of change you want. And to that degree, we are willing to bite the bullet that you have message control, you have more centralized message, because we think that is more effective. But they say that you can get more discussion of these groups. I'm just not sure it's necessarily good that you get these endless theories and endless discussions, which needs to have no endpoint. The thing about it is, at least a protest movement, because you have to decide what to charge. You have to decide what causes you are supporting in a narrow way, or at least that's the premise of their side when they're attacking us. You do have to end those discussions at some point, compared to just constantly talking within your own bubble, which doesn't have any kind of external validity. So we're okay on that side. But they do know, right? There is going to be that they do know that what kind of image is presented. We need to present a much more moderate and reasonable image in some cases on our side. The reason is protests themselves are a story that some of the media is willing to cover, and the media can talk to those protests and centralized leaders. On their side, the profit incentives obviously meaning you often take the most extreme views. You can paint that entire movement as ridiculous, which is why you don't get a change. But I will concede that in some cases you end up in violence. Maybe some of those groups want people more on the extreme side of these protest movements tend to violence. Maybe the riot police tend to violence. I don't think that's bad. And I think there's a couple of reasons why it's not bad. The first one is I think violence actually does give more attention to these movements. If you care about people knowing about that, which we both go talk about in a moment, we think that actually is gain. But secondly, it is useful because it changes the way we look at the movement in two ways. The first is it makes it very clear what the consequences of not listening to the movement are, that you may end up with violence. But more importantly, it recenters the middle. The point about Malcolm X is he makes people like Martin Luther King seem like people you have to negotiate with, both because you know the potential consequences if you don't, which is violence, but also because he now seems moderate. That is why you get change. So in the cases you get violence, we don't think that's necessarily bad. Yes, we find it regrettable that people do suffer from violence, but really that's something they can set into, and at least on the social level, that's good. Finally, on the issue of awareness, there are 178 million tweets every single day, they tell you. I think the algorithm probably won't give you something which you actively dislike. The algorithms, by and large, look at people who already like this kind of stuff. Secondly, we think often just because of the amount of information you get through, you don't care in the first place. Thirdly, we think you do opt in. You like certain pages, and thus the algorithm gives you stuff from those pages. That's obviously the way Facebook and Twitter work. The comparative, and it's very easy to ignore, like what they say. The comparative is when you actually have physical space, you are in physical space. That can be disruptive, but becomes much harder for an individual to ignore, and that is where you get the kind of awareness which might sort of break the starting point to begin with. So you aren't already speaking to people who are converted. You can actually convince some individuals who are not. At the end of this debate, if the question is who gets changed, we create the political movement. We create the Bernie Sanders. We create those individuals accepting Black Lives Matter. We create a much more forceful narrative, and we actually, in even the worst case where you get violence, we're very happy to stand on the side of the opposition.
Thank you all for that speech. And now to wrap the side opposition, Rob on the door. I invite the last speaker. Here.
There really is only one key issue in this debate. The key issue is, do these movements manage to achieve what they want? It's not whether or not people get beaten up. It's not whether or not you get support network. And most of the argumentation actually supports this hypothesis. So what do we need to do to get these outcomes? We put to you two very simple arguments. The first is that you need to reach out to people who disagree with you. The second is that you need to be taken seriously. Note that at no point in this debate that our case hinge on you being taken as a nice bunch of people, or a calm bunch of people, or a non-threatening bunch of people. We very early on bit the bullet on violence, bit the bullet on being seen as antagonistic. We only said, as long as you're taken seriously, as long as they need to deal with you and give you some concessions, that is a win. And unfortunately, the opposition never engaged with us at that level of specificity. Firstly, therefore, on the issue of reaching out to people who disagree with you. We pointed out two very basic problems, which are comparatively worse on social media than they are when it comes to physical protests. The first thing we said is that there often are very big self-selection problems in terms of what social media you choose to consume. It is by and large an opt-in. The second thing we pointed out is that because a protest is intrinsically interesting in a way that the tweet is not, the way the media reports on these two issues is different. The media has far more leeway to report the nature of the issue in social media because it chooses what it chooses to report, rather than a protest, because you might still have some discrimination, but there's comparatively less. And thirdly, Harry's pointed out to you that the algorithms on social media filter those 178 million tweets. Yes, that's a very large number, but that filtering means that there's also a self-selection problem there. So it's harder for you to meet people who disagree with you. Compared to protests, which are often hostile, which are often disruptive, which are often violent, which often happen in precisely those neighborhoods which most disagree with them. So on the issue of just, do we make contact with people, we've got an issue. So now that we've got contact, what do we then need? Let's deal with them on their most powerful ground. Let's assume you are just taken as an antagonistic group. Why are we still okay with that? Because number one, even if you're antagonistic towards the majority, maybe a politician in the area, or just a politician like Bernie Sanders, decides that there is at least enough critical mass, not mass, to make this a vital political issue and win votes. There was never any response to this throughout the entire debate. Secondly, they portray you as a group which needs to be dealt with precisely because a protest is dangerous. No, this even applies to them in their best case scenario of China. Because if there's a physical protest, yes, let's assume China comes in and kills everyone. But, gory, but you know. But the thing is, China will at least realize there's a real problem now. Because even if the physical protest never happens again, they know that something must have happened for people to be willing to risk life and limb to protest. And if the most important issue in this debate is not the welfare of the protesters, but whether the issues are taken seriously, then even in their worst case scenario, we win. What about all the other scenarios? We're not dealing with a state which doesn't even believe in freedom of speech or assembly to begin with. We think the benefits are concomitantly larger. The key mechanism they will rely on their side, therefore, by the way, one more mechanism for this, because we like mechanisms. We also talked about how even violent protests in an environment where many protests are happening actually shift the definition of the center so that peaceful protests become seen as people need to deal with that stuff of Malcolm X, making Martin Luther King a bit more reasonable. So what do they have really? The key link in that case was this idea of a false illusion of mass support. That when people see 1 million likes on something, the assumption will be that the vast majority of them, or a significant proportion, carry real emotional heft. We pointed out this was unrealistic given the social media environment in which many discussions are from the very beginning already incredibly insensitive and irate and unreasonable, and given the fact that politicians, probably every other tweet they get calls them a horrible human being, and they give an interesting number of ways, right? So it's unclear why people would assume that these things are serious, given the nature of social media and how it works. Lastly, even when it comes to the issue of violence, even then, the fact that people are willing to do that tells you something. Even there, you change the nature of political discourse and make people willing to make concessions to you. Look, I think we are just the side which more understands how you get results. They don't. I oppose.
And now to wrap up the debate, we also have this case. I invite the government speaker.
A couple of years ago, Malaysians thought we were on the brink of something great. There were 2,000 people filling the streets of Kuala Lumpur, demanding change, demanding justice. 2 years later, Versailles is irrelevant. I haven't heard of them in 10 months. No newspaper has brought an article of them. And the only thing that we have left of them are videos and chants from a different time ago. If Versailles had a better presence online, if we had a more continuous presence, perhaps the fight for justice would be better. Perhaps the fight for justice would have been still ongoing. There's one issue that really defies this debate at this point. Is that in which role are social justice groups more able to maneuver and spread their message? And there's a couple of things that we told you that has not been engaged with, and I'm going to point it out. Firstly, we told you several plethora of reasons as to why physical protests are impossible or harder for individuals to access. The police presence at these areas, the threat of the police beating down your individuals feeling fear of a gunshot at the protest. So you know what the response we got was? Oh, they can protest on weekends. That's a small problem. You know, the baton the police use, it kind of is active on the weekend. That's why they also had tear gas fire at them on a a weekend, but oh well, we should just protest on weekends then. But the second thing I'm going to point out then is that if at first I was excited because I thought they just weren't engaging, but the whip made it better. He said they concede to all our harm. Absolutely fantastic, my friend. You know why? Then the debate boils down to a comparative. In your world, you have less people at your protests, and if you concede to all the harms we have of police beating you down, the 3 people that show up for a Black Lives Matter protest are being beaten, they are being shot, they have tear gas in the eye. How do they get their message out? They're dying. They cannot. They can't. Comparatively, in our world, where we have 3,000 individuals giving the illusion of a powerful Black Lives Matter, these people can affect more. These people can carry out, or at least give the illusion that our movement is stronger. But oh well, I guess 3 people getting beaten up is better. Secondly, let's talk about a couple of contradictions that have come on the side of opposition. The first premise brought to us by the leader of opposition was that social media is ineffective as it is too diverse. Then the deputy leader of opposition came out and told us that physical protests are great because they are diverse. So which one is it? If your physical protests can be diverse, you accrue all the harms that we told you about earlier. If they aren't diverse, then you accrue none of the benefits that you spoke about. So I'm not sure which one it is. And lastly, I'm really going to have fun here. The new matter in the reply speech, like the Bernie Sanders issue. Firstly, you have to tell us why Bernie Sanders cannot capitalize on 1 million followers that exist on Twitter as well. I don't think there was much of an explanation as to why this was the case. Comparatively, in our world, when Bernie Sanders can hit 1 tweet and hit 1 million retweets on the illusion that he has 1 million fans, compared to having a speech in Washington, D.C., where only 200 people show up, I think our world is preferable in that sense. Lastly, let's have the last comparative of this debate. In our world, how do we attain change? Notice the characterization that we brought in. Protests are expensive, they take a long time to organize, and are oftentimes sporadic. This means that the type of pressure that they get in the side of opposition are limited. It comes once in a while. But in our world, when you have thousands of Twitter accounts spamming Paul Ryan's email, spamming his Twitter, blocking Donald Trump on Twitter, what this means is that there is a constant pressure on these individuals to face the issues that we want them to face. It is harder for them to ignore us thanks to the algorithms. They try to misrepresent this and tell you that the algorithms selectively select. But no, the analysis that we brought was that the algorithm prioritizes what's the most popular tweet. If your Black Lives Matter accounts collectively post 1 million tweets a day, they cannot ignore you. So maybe the speaker before you tried to convince you that we don't understand protests, except we understand protests work with consistencies.
Thank all speakers for the debate. Please cross the floor, shake hands. Everyone, please take the room and head back to the seat. Caller,
Thank you.
I think I see way too much.